Hello everyone, welcome to 90 Days of DevOps. This session is going to be about one of the most popular trends in the industry last year, and that has been GitOps. In this video, I'm going to demystify GitOps for you and actually show you how it's not as complicated as you might think and how you can actually get started with it very simply using a dummy application I'll show you. So you can use that application to model your own apps and use GitOps principles with them. So, bit of introduction before we get started. I am Arsh. I work as a DevX engineer at Octeto. We are a platform for development experience automation, and I'm also a CNCF ambassador. I've been contributing to the Kubernetes project for about 2 years now, and I have been working on GitOps also for a year or so now. With that out of the way, let's get started. Before we go ahead and see what the demo is, let's all make sure that we are all on the same page about what GitOps is. So GitOps basically means using Git repos as the source of truth for your application deployment and infrastructure. Now what this means is that everything gets stored in a version control Git repository, and that is used as a single source of truth to drive your deployments and infrastructure creation. This is just a basic definition, so even if this does not make sense right now, do not worry. As we see the demo, everything will become more clear. So GitOps has some key principles which I feel we must discuss, because GitOps is it's not a particular software or technology. It's an ideology, just like DevOps or agile principles or other things are. The first GitOps principle is being declarative in nature. What does being declarative in nature mean? Just like for Kubernetes, you don't have to give exact instructions about what steps to undertake. Instead of that, you just tell what the final state should look like and you define that. That is called being declarative in nature. And a system is declarative in nature if it only needs the final state and the final output and not the exact steps to reach that state. So a GitOps system has to be declarative. The second is version and immutable. This simply refers to the fact that you need to use a Git repo for your declarative configuration. If you use a Git repo, you automatically ensure that it is version and it is immutable, and all your changes are stored in a Git repo, and you have a track, a version history of all the changes you make to your configuration. The third thing is pulled automatically, and this is where GitOps agents come into play. Pulled automatically means a GitOps agent will continuously poll the repo where we have stored this declarative and versioned configuration at particular intervals, and it will see that if any changes are needed or not. And if changes are needed, we come to the fourth principle, which is continuously reconciled. It will reconcile the differences between the source of truth which we have defined in a Git repo and what is actually being deployed on the cluster or wherever you are doing your deployments. So using these four principles, a GitOps system manages to use Git repo as a source of truth and enable continuous deployment very easily. Now that we understand these four principles, let us move on to a question which I have asked a lot of my co-workers and colleagues and other people I meet at conferences, and that is GitOps scary? And most of the time people know what GitOps is, but when it comes to implementing, they say yes, it is scary, it is hard to do, and there are so many options and there's so many tools, and I want to do this. But this session is supposed to tell you that it's better not to overcomplicate things and focus on the simple stuff. So does it have to be scary? No, it does not. The idea is that in this session you'll learn how to implement the core ideology of GitOps using just Argo CD and GitHub Actions. I'll show you how to set up a simple workflow which you can extend to your own applications, and they might be as complex in nature as you want them to be. But this simple starting point is meant to illustrate that getting started with GitOps is very, very easy. So do not try to over-engineer things when you are getting started with it. Pick a tool, be it Flux, Argo CD, or any other GitOps agent, and stick with it. And then choose what you want to use for automation. In this case, I'm using GitHub Actions, but I want to tell you that there is not a lot of value you'll get over fussing over tools and trying to create the most complicated solution in terms of just trying out things. So try to keep it simple and then build on top of that. Before we go to the demo, I want to give you a glimpse of what our implemented GitOps system will look like. So let us understand that on the next slide. And I'll just move my video a little bit here. And okay, so this is what the flow we are going to be implementing will look like. We'll have a developer, and the whole idea is that when they commit code, that should trigger a GitHub action. Now, what this GitHub action will do is it will build the latest container images based on the commit which was merged, and it will push those images into an image registry. The next thing it will do is that once those images have been pushed, it will update the manifest with the latest image tag which it built and pushed. So it will create a commit in the repo which updates the manifest. And our GitOps agent, which is Argo CD, so we are at the 5th step now, our GitOps agent will continuously be polling this repo, and it will detect that something has changed in this repo. Once it does that, it will reconcile this change with the already running application in the cluster, and we'll see our desired state in production up and running. Now, for simplicity, I'm using a single repo architecture here. It is recommended that you separate your application code and application manifests in different repos, but the basic workflow is like this. Like, even if you separate repos, all you have to do is change the 4th step to update the manifest in a different repo as compared to the repo where the application code got updated. So enough talking and enough theory now. Let's go back and see a demo of how this actually works. So before I show you how it is configured, I want to show you this demo we talked about in action. You'll find all the instructions to follow this step by step in this code repository, which is github.com/gitops-sample. I'll also link you to a blog which has the detailed steps which we are following here. But what I expect right now is that you have a Kubernetes cluster which has Argo CD installed, and that's about it. So I have this simple app deployed to production, and it's deployed at gitops.arsharma.com. And now I, as a developer, want to change something here. So I want to change hello GitOps to hello world. So I go to my code editor, and I would go to the main.go file, and here I'll change this to hello world. Okay, I'll hit save, and then I'll commit my changes. So I have pushed my code. Let us go back to the GitHub repository and see what happens. You'll see that a GitHub action is now running, which is going through the whole GitOps flow that we saw in that diagram. So let's see the detailed steps by clicking here. So right now it is building and pushing the image, and after that it will update the Helm chart which is being used to deploy this application. So I'll cut the video here and resume once it finishes. Alright, so you see that our GitHub action is done pushing the images and updating the manifest. We can verify this as well by going to our history, and we'll see that there are actually 2 commits. One was made by the GitHub action where it updated the image tag, and if we see that, we can see that the tag has been updated. So let us go back to our Argo UI. Ignore this other app. This is the app which we have deployed, and if we go back here, we will see that Argo CD has not yet polled the repo because it has a certain polling interval at which it checks that if it has the latest state or not. So we can force that polling interval by clicking refresh, and as soon as we do that, you see that it detects that it is out of sync. This means what has been deployed in production is different from what is there in our source of truth in the GitHub repo. So you can configure Argo CD to automatically reconcile these changes, but I haven't done that here because I wanted to have a control over when the synchronization happens, and that is why to synchronize the changes, I'll just click the sync button and click synchronize. So you'll see that Argo CD is changing our deployment with the other deployment which has the latest image tag, and soon it'll be up, and it deleted the previous pod. This is the part of Argo CD I really love, where they show you in real time like what all has been deployed and how things are changing. This is one of my favorite parts. So now if we go back to our production URL and hit refresh, you'll see that our app is changed and reflected the latest change in our commit. Now, wasn't that very cool? You saw how we automated the entire pipeline from a developer making a commit to things getting deployed in production so easily by just using Argo CD and GitHub Actions. So now I want to take you behind the scenes and show you how this was all configured, so you can also take a page from this book and implement this in your own repositories and for your own projects. The first thing you need to do is install Argo CD, obviously, but when you have installed Argo CD, what you need to do next is create an application. An application is basically configuring the repository you want Argo CD to monitor and the Kubernetes cluster you want it to deploy to and all of that stuff. So the way to do that is click on New App, and then you will be presented with this UI where you can configure a lot of things. I do not recommend this UI based approach, and I prefer YAML instead. So just click Edit as YAML and you'll be given a YAML where you can add all of the things. So the YAML I used for this project is under apps go server prod. So if you just take this and copy paste this to the UI, you will be able to replicate what I'm doing in this demo. But let's take a closer look at this YAML to understand the different pieces. First, we have all the standard metadata where we tell what the name is, and then the spec part is where things get interesting. So for destination, we tell that the name is in cluster, and that means the cluster where Argo CD is installed, that is the same as where we want this application to be deployed. And you don't have to do it this way. You can have a different cluster where just Argo CD is running and a different cluster for your prod app. And you can find how to do that in the documentation, which I'll link wherever this video is available. But yeah, in cluster basically tells that you are using the same cluster for Argo CD and your application deployment, and that's totally valid to do as well. Then we tell the namespace we want this application to deploy it in, and in our case that was prod namespace. So if I go back to my terminal, I can see here that that a namespace called prod was automatically created, and if I get all the resources in prod, you'll see that all the things were created by Argo CD, which we could see on the UI as well, but you can see that our Go server deployment is already running here. Then next is where we configure what manifests we want Argo CD to monitor. When it will detect a change in these manifests, then it will reconcile the differences. So we tell it to monitor the chart folder, which is where the Helm chart to deploy this simple Go server is. Then we give it the repo URL, which is where I have stored this code. And then we tell it to always target the head of this repository. And then since I'm using Helm, I get to define where the values file is. You could have multiple value files, right? You could have one for staging or one for dev or something like that. So you get to specify what you're using this for. I only had one values file because of this simple example. But if you have multiple, you can specify which one you want to use. So this also allows you to, use the same configuration. But so if you want to deploy this app to dev and prod, then you can change the values file for each of them while keeping everything else the same. Then we just tell that this is part of the default project in the Argo CD, and then in the sync options, I have told that create the namespace prod if it does not exist. And this was it. This is all the simple configuration we require. You can read more about each of these terms and other things you can configure on the Argo CD docs, but this is more than enough to get you started with a simple setup. So this covers the Argo CD side of things. Now let us look at our GitHub action, which is responsible for building the application images and pushing them to Docker Hub and then updating our manifests as well. So I'll go to the GitOps workflow I have defined here, and you'll see that first of all, I tell that this workflow should only be triggered when the main.go file is changed, because I do not have any other application code here. So this is useful to do because I don't want this action to be running when I update the readme or something else. Then as part of jobs, I have a build job and I have an update job. The build job basically builds the latest images from the latest code. So we check out the repo code, we log into Docker Hub using secrets, which I have added in my repository settings, basically my Docker Hub username and token. And then we use the build and push action, which builds the application images, and the tag it gives the images is the same as the SHA for the latest commit. So that is why we are able to identify like what commit is building what image. And this is useful because GitHub allows you to simply access this. So for each commit the action runs, I have access to this information in my GitHub action. The next step is basically updating the Helm manifest, and in this case I check out the code again, and this is where your configuration might differ. If you are separating the application code and application manifest, then instead of checking out this repo, you would check out the repo of the application manifest, which would be a different repo, and then you would make a commit here, commit there, instead of how I'm making a commit in the same repo. So then we just simply run a sed command, which I use ChatGPT to generate, and this would just replace the existing tag with the new image tag, which is simply the GitHub SHA. And once that is done, I just commit all my changes and push them. And once the changes get pushed, GitHub action is done, and then things get transferred to Argo CD, and it is responsible for polling the repo, detecting there was a change, and then reconciling those changes. So that was it. That was a simple GitOps flow we set up on our own using just Argo CD and GitHub Actions. Nothing too complicated, right? And at the same time, so useful for teams when you're working in an organization with like multiple developers and platform engineers. This can really act as the link to bridge the gap between like developers who commit their code and platform engineers who need to take care of deploying things and managing how the infrastructure looks. Before concluding, I just have one last slide to tell about the benefits of GitOps, and I purposefully kept it after we had seen the demo so that you can understand these things in a much better way. The first and the biggest benefit for me is being able to see the history of how your application deployments and manifests have evolved over time because of version control, which you get when you store your manifests in a Git repo. So this allows you to clearly see how things change, and if something breaks, you can see the exact commit which broke that change. You can revert that commit, because when you revert that commit, your head would change and Argo CD would just automatically apply that. So it makes things very easy when you're storing them in version control. The next is standardization and governance. Platform engineers and DevOps engineers love Argo CD because it allows them to have control and see how things get changed. In a traditional way, you would manually, run kubectl commands to update things, and then when one person updates, the other person does not know about this, and there's no centralized way to keep track of things. When you use GitOps with Argo CD or any other agent, you are ensuring that a repo, a repository acts as a gateway to the cluster, to interacting with your deployments, and then that ensures that everything is standardized and you have full governance about how things look. And this also brings to the third point, which is security. You do not have to give now Kubernetes access to your developers or people who are pushing to prod or changing things in prod. You just have to tell them to make a pull request on the repo, which Argo CD is monitoring. And what's good is that you can even run CI tests on the same repo before merging that pull request and see the changes easily. So that handles the aspect of security instead of the traditional way of giving people access to the cluster. And the fourth is just being able to ship things faster. Once you have set up a GitOps pipeline, you can sleep peacefully knowing that nobody can make sudden changes to your cluster. Everything is via version control system, and all the developers need to do is, like we saw in this demo, push a commit with their code change, and you can automate all of that part, run tests at whatever part you want to in the process, and automate the entire cycle. So like you saw in this case, I still had some dependency on me manually clicking sync in Argo CD UI, but you can change that. You can configure Argo CD to automatically just apply the latest changes whenever it detects them. You can reduce the detection time for Argo CD to poll the repo more frequently, but that does not make much sense unless you're doing a demo for a workshop. But yeah, these are the four things which I feel GitOps solves, and it can bring great value to organizations who want to ship fast and who want to keep things secure, and standardized. Finally, thank you for watching this session, and I really hope you found this useful. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me on Twitter or LinkedIn, and I'm happy to help you out. The detailed steps for what we saw are available in a blog which you can find on my website arsharma.com. You'll also find the link to the GitHub repo I used for this demo in this blog, and everything else basically is in the blog. So if you have any further questions or you just want to recap what we did, check out the blog. That was it. Thank you for watching again, and I hope you enjoy and find value from all the other sessions as well in this 90 Days of DevOps series, and have a nice day.